The jogger's scream shattered the Florida morning like glass hitting pavement. Margaret Patterson had been running Highway 95's shoulder for 12 years, but she'd never seen anything like this. The German Shepherd lay crumpled against the guardrail like discarded trash, his once magnificent coat matted with dried blood and sand. Someone had taken a blade, maybe a machete, to his face, leaving jagged wounds that spoke of calculated cruelty. His mouth was packed with coarse sand, as if his attacker wanted to silence him even in death. But those eyes, dear God, those amber eyes still held intelligence, still tracked her movement with the focused awareness of a trained professional. This wasn't just animal abuse, this was an execution. As Margaret's trembling fingers dialed 911, the shepherd's tail gave the faintest twitch. What this broken warrior did next would restore America's faith in second chances and prove that even in our darkest moments, heroes still walk among us, sometimes on four legs. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, the German Shepherd known as Max had been the pride of Miami-Dade's elite SWAT division. At 5 years old, he'd completed 47 successful operations, specializing in bomb detection and suspect apprehension. His handler, Officer Bobby Ray Carson, called him the finest partner I ever had, words that would later taste like ash in his mouth. Max wasn't just another canine, he was a legend. When other dogs hesitated, Max charged forward. When bombs threatened innocent lives, Max found them. When suspects ran, Max brought them home. In 6 years of service, he'd never abandoned a mission or a partner. The department's walls displayed his commendations alongside those of human officers because Max had earned his place among Miami's finest. But that Tuesday in March changed everything. The IED explosion that supposedly killed Max also shattered something fundamental in the soul of his handler. Now, as Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell rushed through the automatic doors of Sunrise Animal Hospital, she carried her own ghosts. At 38, she dedicated her life to emergency veterinary medicine, driven by a promise made at her father's graveside 15 years ago. Police officer Daniel Mitchell had died in the line of duty, and Sarah honored his memory by ensuring that every badge, whether worn by human or canine, had the best chance of coming home. "Every badge deserves to come home," she'd whispered at his funeral, and those words had become her life's mission. The call from emergency dispatch had been unlike any other. A German Shepherd, possibly a former police dog, found brutally attacked and left for dead. The responding paramedic's voice had cracked when he described the injuries. "Doc, I've seen war zones. This is worse. Someone wanted this animal to suffer." Sarah's hands were already scrubbed and steady as she approached the examination table. The shepherd, magnificent even in his broken state, allowed her to approach without growling. That trust, offered despite unimaginable betrayal, told her everything she needed to know about his character. "Hello, beautiful boy," she whispered, her voice carrying the same gentle authority her father had used with frightened witnesses. "Let's see what they did to you." The microchip scanner's beep revealed the first mystery. Max, Miami-Dade Canine Unit. But when Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, the screen displayed words that made no sense. Deceased, line of duty death. How do you rescue a dog that's already supposed to be dead? And why would someone want the world to believe this hero was gone forever? As Sarah began her examination, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just treating injuries. She was uncovering a cover-up that reached into the darkest corners of the badge her father had died wearing. The emergency room erupted into controlled chaos as Sarah's team mobilized around the German Shepherd. What they discovered in those first critical hours would haunt everyone present and launch an investigation that would shake Miami-Dade County to its core. Jesus Christ, whispered veterinary technician Maria Santos as she cataloged the injuries under Sarah's direction. Doc, this wasn't random. Look at the precision. Sarah's trained eye confirmed what her heart refused to accept. The facial lacerations weren't the wild slashes of a disturbed individual. They were methodical, designed to cause maximum suffering without immediate death. Someone had taken their time with this animal, and that someone understood anatomy well enough to avoid vital organs while maximizing pain. "The sand," Sarah murmured, carefully irrigating the shepherd's mouth. "It's not beach sand. This is construction grade, coarse grain." She paused, her stomach turning. "Maria, get me a sample for analysis, and call Detective Torres. This is a crime scene." The shepherd, Max, according to his chip, remained remarkably calm during the initial examination. His amber eyes tracked every movement, and when Sarah spoke softly to him, his ears would prick forward despite his obvious pain. This was a working dog, trained to assess threats and respond accordingly. The fact that he allowed their touch spoke volumes about his character and his desperate need for help. "Doctor?" Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind raced with questions. The computer system showed Max's death certificate dated 3 months ago, signed by the department veterinarian and witnessed by his handler, Robert Carson. Yet here lay very much alive evidence that the report was false. Someone had declared this dog dead while keeping him alive for purposes too horrific to contemplate immediately. "Dr. Mitchell?" called receptionist Janet from the front desk, her voice tight with concern. "Detective Torres is here, and there's a man from Animal Control. Also, Channel 7 News just pulled into the parking lot." Sarah cursed under her breath. Media attention was the last thing they needed while Max's condition remained critical. "Tell them no comment until we stabilize the patient, and get those news vans off hospital property." Detective Lisa Torres entered the examination room with the measured stride of someone accustomed to seeing humanity's worst impulses. A 20-year veteran of Miami-Dade, she'd worked enough animal cruelty cases to recognize the signs of systematic abuse. But even Torres stepped back when she saw Max's condition. "Mother of God," Torres breathed. "Sarah, tell me this dog has a fighting chance." "He's strong," Sarah replied, not lifting her eyes from her patient. "Dehydrated, malnourished, infected wounds, but his vitals are holding steady." "Lisa, this is a police dog, or was. The system shows him as killed in action 3 months ago." Torres pulled out her notepad, her expression hardening. "Give me everything you know." As Sarah recounted the morning's discoveries, Torres's questions grew increasingly pointed. The address listed for Robert Carson raised immediate red flags. 777 Pine Street was in a neighborhood known for drug activity and violence. The timing of Max's supposed death coincided with a departmental investigation into missing evidence and suspicious incident reports, and the nature of Max's injuries suggested someone with veterinary or medical training. "There's something else," Sarah said, hesitating. "When I ran the address through our system, it shows a missing dog report filed 4 weeks ago. Same Robert Carson claiming his German Shepherd ran away during a thunderstorm." Torres closed her notepad with a snap. "I'm calling this in to Internal Affairs." "Sarah, you need to understand, if this dog was officially declared dead, but someone's been keeping him alive, we're not just talking about animal cruelty. We're looking at fraud, evidence tampering, possibly accessory to whatever happened in that original incident." The weight of those words settled over the examination room like a shroud. Max wasn't just a victim, he was a witness. And someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure his silence. "He's crashing!" Maria's shout cut through the tension like a blade. The monitors showed Max's blood pressure plummeting, his breathing becoming labored. Internal bleeding, the killer that claimed more trauma victims than the original injury. Sarah's training kicked in with mechanical precision. Get him to surgery now. Type and cross-match for blood products. I need 2 units of canine plasma and prep the OR. She turned to Torres. Detective, whatever investigation you're planning will have to wait. Right now, my only concern is keeping this witness alive. The next 6 hours blurred together in a symphony of surgical instruments and whispered prayers. Sarah's team worked with the intensity of battlefield medics, fighting to repair damage that went far beyond the visible wounds. The internal injuries told a story of prolonged abuse, old fractures that had healed incorrectly, scar tissue that spoke of previous surgeries performed without proper equipment or expertise. Someone's been working on this dog for months, Sarah told Torres during a brief break. These aren't fresh injuries overlaying healthy tissue. This is systematic, long-term torture disguised as medical care. The sand analysis results arrived as Sarah was closing the final sutures. Construction sand, as she'd suspected, but with traces of something that made Torres's blood run cold. Explosive residue. RDX, the same compound used in military ordnance and the signature calling card of the IED that had supposedly killed Max 3 months ago. Sarah, Torres said quietly, I think your patient here was present at his own death. As word spread through the hospital about the German Shepherd's condition, something unexpected began to happen. The waiting room filled with visitors, not just curious onlookers, but members of the community who'd heard fragments of the story and felt compelled to help. Vietnam veterans sat beside soccer moms, sharing stories about dogs they'd known and loved. A group of elementary school children arrived with hand-drawn get-well cards, their teacher explaining that they'd seen the news report and wanted to do something nice for the hurt doggie. But it was the arrival of Jake and Maria Rodriguez that truly changed the trajectory of Max's story. The couple entered the hospital quietly, their grief still fresh from the loss of their son Tommy, a 19-year-old Marine killed in Afghanistan 2 years earlier. They'd driven 3 hours from Orlando after seeing the news coverage, drawn by something they couldn't quite articulate. We know what it's like to lose a hero, Jake told Sarah simply, and we know what it's like to wish we could bring one home. As the sun set over Sunrise Animal Hospital, Max, still sedated but stable, lay surrounded by flowers, cards, and toy donations from strangers who'd been touched by his story. But in the parking lot, a figure watched from a rusted pickup truck, hands shaking not from fear, but from rage. Bobby Ray Carson had seen the news reports, had watched his carefully constructed lie unraveling in real time. The dog was supposed to be dead. The secret was supposed to stay buried. And now everything Bobby had sacrificed to protect, his reputation, his pension, his freedom, hung in the balance because of one German shepherd's stubborn refusal to die. As Bobby reached for the bottle of whiskey on his passenger seat, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know what you did. Atlas remembers everything. Someone had given the dog a new name. Someone was sending a message. And Bobby Carson realized that his 3 months of borrowed time had just run out. The name came to Sarah in the pre-dawn hours of the second day as she sat beside the German Shepherd's recovery kennel, watching his steady breathing. Atlas, the Titan condemned to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. It seemed fitting for a dog who bore the burden of secrets that could topple careers and destroy lives. "Hello, Atlas," she whispered, and for the first time since his rescue, his tail moved in what might have been recognition. The morning brought Detective Torres with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse and an expression that could freeze hellfire. She'd spent the night diving deep into the official records surrounding Max's supposed death, and what she'd discovered made her 20 years of police work look like a church picnic. "Sarah, we need to talk," Torres said, her voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room until I say otherwise." "Understood?" Sarah nodded, her hand instinctively moving to Atlas's kennel, as if drawing strength from his presence. The IED incident that supposedly killed Max happened during a raid on a warehouse suspected of housing a drug distribution network. Torres began, spreading photographs across Sarah's desk. 3 officers went in with 2 K9 units. Only 2 officers came out, and they claimed both dogs were killed in the blast. The crime scene photos showed devastation that defied comprehension: twisted metal, scattered debris, and burned patterns that spoke of professional demolition work. But something in the arrangement of evidence made Sarah's trained eye pause. "Lisa, I'm not an explosives expert, but this doesn't look like an improvised device. This looks like controlled demolition." "Exactly." Torres' smile held no warmth. The FBI explosives team reached the same conclusion, but their report was buried under administrative red tape. The case was closed as death in line of duty before any real investigation could begin. Sarah studied the photographs more carefully, her medical training helping her interpret the scene from a different angle. "Where are the bodies?" "I see blood, but not the kind of tissue damage you'd expect from an explosion this size." "That's the million-dollar question." Officer Daniel Mitchell was asking the same thing before his car went off the Rickenbacker Causeway 3 weeks later. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. "My father was investigating this case?" Torres nodded grimly. "Your father was the lead detective assigned to the warehouse incident. He'd been asking uncomfortable questions about the evidence, about the missing bodies, about why the case was being rushed to closure. His accident report reads like a bad joke: single vehicle collision, no skid marks, no witnesses, mechanical failure that the insurance company refused to pay out on." Sarah's world tilted sideways. Her father hadn't died in a random traffic accident. He'd been murdered for getting too close to the truth that Atlas now carried in his traumatized mind. "There's more," Torres continued, her voice gentling slightly. "I pulled the personnel records for everyone involved in the warehouse raid. Officer Robert Carson was placed on administrative leave 2 weeks after the incident, officially for stress-related performance issues. Unofficially, because his story kept changing every time Internal Affairs interviewed him." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Bobby Carson hadn't lost his partner in a heroic explosion. He'd participated in whatever really happened in that warehouse. And when Sarah's father had gotten too close to exposing the truth, he'd paid with his life. "Atlas isn't just a victim," Sarah whispered. "He's the only witness who survived." "Which explains why someone wanted him dead but couldn't quite pull the trigger," Torres agreed. "Killing a police dog is bad optics, even for corrupt cops. But keeping him alive and torturing him, that sends a message to anyone else who might be thinking about talking." The implications crashed over Sarah like a tsunami. Atlas hadn't just been abused. He'd been held as insurance, a living reminder of the consequences of betrayal. Every day of his captivity had been a message. This is what happens to those who threaten to expose the truth. Atlas stirred in his kennel, those intelligent amber eyes focusing on Sarah's face with an intensity that made her breath catch. It was as if he understood every word of their conversation, as if he'd been waiting months for someone to finally connect the dots. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew the answer would change everything. "Now we make Atlas disappear," Torres said firmly. "Officially, he remains deceased. Unofficially, he becomes our star witness in the biggest police corruption case Miami-Dade has seen in 30 years. But Sarah, you need to understand, once we go down this road, there's no coming back. These people killed your father. They won't hesitate to kill you, me, or anyone else who gets in their way." Sarah looked at Atlas, seeing not just a broken animal, but a fellow survivor of Bobby Carson's betrayal. Her father had died trying to seek justice for the voiceless. Now Atlas was offering her the chance to finish what Daniel Mitchell had started. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Torres pulled out a second folder, this one containing surveillance photos that made Sarah's blood freeze. Bobby Carson, standing in the hospital parking lot. Bobby Carson, following her car home last night. Bobby Carson, purchasing ammunition at a sporting goods store with cash. "He's escalating," Torres explained. "My contacts in the department say he's been calling in favors, trying to find out Atlas's condition and location. He knows the dog's alive, and he knows that every day Atlas survives is another day closer to his own reckoning." The third folder contained the most disturbing evidence yet. Veterinary records that Bobby had falsified, showing treatment for injuries that Atlas had never received. Someone had been billing the department for phantom medical care while actually torturing the animal they were supposed to be healing. "How many people are involved in this?" Sarah asked. "We're still mapping the network, but it's bigger than just Bobby Carson." The warehouse incident was covered up by at least 6 people, including 2 supervisors and someone in the district attorney's office. "Your father was investigating a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of local law enforcement." Sarah felt the weight of her father's legacy settling on her shoulders like a mantle. Daniel Mitchell had died fighting for justice. Now his daughter had the chance to honor his memory by ensuring that Atlas's story finally saw daylight. "I'll do whatever it takes," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "But I have one condition. Atlas's safety comes first. I won't let him become another casualty of this cover-up." Torres extended her hand. "Partners?" "Partners," Sarah agreed, sealing an alliance that would either bring justice to Miami-Dade County or get them both killed in the attempt. As if sensing the gravity of their pact, Atlas struggled to his feet in his kennel. Despite his injuries, despite his trauma, despite every reason to give up, he pressed his nose against the bars and looked directly at Sarah with eyes that held more courage than most humans could claim. In that moment, Sarah understood why her father had been willing to die for the truth. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of the cost. And Atlas, scarred, betrayed, but unbroken, had just reminded her that heroes come in all forms, even when they walk on 4 legs and carry the weight of the world in their amber eyes. The war for justice was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell was finally ready to finish what her father had started. The transformation began on Atlas's 5th day of recovery, marked not by medical milestones but by a moment of trust so profound it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She'd entered his kennel for the morning examination when Atlas did something no one expected. He placed his massive paw on her hand and looked directly into her eyes, as if transferring the weight of his secrets into her care. "He's choosing you," whispered Maria Santos, who'd seen thousands of animals recover but never witnessed anything quite like this. "Dr. Mitchell, that dog is putting his life in your hands." The bond that formed between Sarah and Atlas over the following weeks transcended typical veterinarian-patient relationships. Atlas seemed to understand that Sarah carried her own grief, her own burden of loss from her father's death. When she sat beside his kennel during her breaks, reading case files about the warehouse incident, Atlas would rest his head near the bars, offering silent companionship that spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, the community response to Atlas's story had grown into something approaching a movement. The GoFundMe campaign had exploded beyond anyone's expectations, reaching $50,000 in donations from people across the country who'd been touched by the story of the German Shepherd who'd survived betrayal. Elementary school children sent hand-drawn pictures of dogs with superhero capes. Vietnam veterans left their service medals at the hospital reception desk with notes that simply read, "For a fellow warrior." But not everyone celebrated Atlas's survival. Detective Torres's investigation had stirred up a hornet's nest of corruption that reached deeper into Miami-Dade's law enforcement than anyone had imagined. Anonymous threats began arriving at the hospital. Phone calls at 3 a.m. warning Sarah to let sleeping dogs lie. Mysterious emails suggesting that accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business. The breakthrough came during Atlas's second week of recovery, when Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a veterinary psychiatrist from the University of Florida, arrived to evaluate his psychological condition. What she discovered would later be called the most sophisticated case of animal PTSD ever documented in veterinary literature. This isn't just trauma from physical abuse, Dr. Hernandez explained to Sarah and Torres as they observed Atlas through one-way glass. Watch his behavior patterns. He's exhibiting symptoms consistent with complex PTSD, hypervigilance, selective mutism with male voices, and most significantly, survivor's guilt. Atlas had been lying quietly in his kennel when a maintenance worker entered the adjacent room. Immediately, the German Shepherd's entire demeanor changed. His ears flattened against his skull, his body pressed against the back wall, and he began exhibiting a repetitive behavior, pawing at an invisible object while whimpering softly. "He's trying to dig," Dr. Hernandez observed. "This is a displacement behavior, probably related to whatever happened in that warehouse. My guess is Atlas was trained to detect explosives, found something, but wasn't able to prevent what happened next. He blames himself for the deaths of his human partners." The psychological evaluation revealed layers of trauma that painted a horrifying picture of Atlas's captivity. Bobby Carson hadn't just kept him alive. He'd systematically broken the dog's spirit through a campaign of psychological warfare. Atlas had been forced to watch training videos of bomb-sniffing dogs being killed in explosions. He'd been fed medication that caused hallucinations and disorientation. Most cruelly, he'd been played recordings of his former partner Rex crying out in pain, conditioning him to believe that his failure to die had caused suffering to others. This level of psychological manipulation requires extensive knowledge of canine behavior and military training protocols, Dr. Hernandez concluded. Whoever did this understood exactly how to break a working dog's mind while keeping his body functional. Sarah felt sick as the full scope of Bobby Carson's cruelty became clear. This hadn't been simple animal abuse. It had been a calculated effort to destroy Atlas's sanity while maintaining his utility as a witness elimination tool. Jake and Maria Rodriguez had become daily visitors during Atlas's recovery, their presence offering a glimpse of what normal family life might look like. Jake, a retired firefighter who understood the bonds between first responders and their canine partners, spent hours simply sitting beside Atlas's kennel, reading newspapers aloud or sharing stories about his son Tommy's military service. "You know what I think, boy?" Jake said during one afternoon visit, his weathered hands resting on Atlas's kennel bars. "I think you and Tommy would have been great friends. He always said the best soldiers were the ones who never forgot they were fighting for something bigger than themselves." Maria brought a different kind of healing energy, her elementary school teacher instincts perfectly attuned to Atlas's need for gentle, consistent care. She'd smuggled in Tommy's favorite squeaky toy, a small rubber duck that had somehow survived 2 deployments to Afghanistan, and left it in Atlas's kennel. The first time Atlas picked up the toy and squeaked it tentatively, Maria burst into tears of joy. "He's learning to play again," she whispered to Sarah. "Oh, honey, he's remembering how to be happy." But happiness remained fragile in the shadow of Bobby Carson's escalating desperation. Torres's investigation had uncovered a web of corruption that implicated 3 other canine officers, 2 supervisors, and a district attorney who'd been taking bribes to bury inconvenient evidence. The warehouse incident hadn't been a drug bust gone wrong. It had been a planned evidence destruction operation designed to eliminate traces of a multi-million-dollar cocaine distribution ring that reached into the highest levels of Miami society. Atlas hadn't just witnessed his partners die in an explosion. He'd watched them discover evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful people in South Florida. Evidence that certain individuals would kill to keep buried. We've identified the other canine units that were supposedly killed in separate incidents, Torres revealed during a clandestine meeting in Sarah's office. Shadow, a Belgian Malinois, reportedly died in a training accident 6 months ago. His body was never recovered. King, a German Shepherd like Atlas, allegedly died from cancer last year, except his veterinary records show he was in perfect health right up until his supposed death. The pattern was clear and horrifying. Someone had been systematically eliminating canine witnesses to the warehouse incident, using falsified death certificates to cover up what amounted to organized murder of law enforcement animals. How many people knew about the real purpose of the warehouse raid? Sarah asked. That's what your father was trying to figure out when he died, Torres replied grimly. His notes suggest he'd identified at least 12 people who had advanced knowledge of what they'd find in that building. 12 people who all had careers to protect and millions of dollars in seized assets to account for. The most chilling revelation came when Torres showed Sarah the warehouse's evidence inventory from the night of the explosion. The building had contained over $3 million in cash, 50 kilograms of pure cocaine, and detailed records of bribes paid to law enforcement officials dating back 5 years. All of it had supposedly been destroyed in the blast, except Atlas's behavior suggested he'd been trained to memorize specific locations and could potentially lead investigators back to where evidence might have been hidden before the explosion. You're telling me that Atlas isn't just a witness? Sarah said slowly. He's a living map to the biggest police corruption scandal in Florida history. Now you understand why Bobby Carson can't let him live, Torres confirmed. And why your father had to die before he could figure out what Atlas knew. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Atlas appeared at his kennel door, his amber eyes alert and focused. Sarah approached him slowly, and he immediately pressed his nose against her palm, a gesture that had become their private signal of trust and communication. In that moment, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Her father had died seeking justice for the voiceless. Atlas had survived months of torture to preserve evidence of systematic corruption. Now it was her turn to ensure that their sacrifices meant something. Torres, she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. I want to go undercover. I want to draw Bobby Carson out into the open where we can catch him in the act. Sarah, that's suicide. Carson's killed before, and he won't hesitate. He won't expect me to bait him willingly, Sarah interrupted. Everyone thinks I'm just a veterinarian trying to save a dog. They don't know I understand the bigger picture. We can use that. Atlas whined softly and placed his paw on the kennel door, as if he understood the conversation and wanted to add his voice to the planning. The German Shepherd who'd been broken by betrayal was ready to trust again, ready to fight alongside the daughter of the detective who'd died trying to save him. The war for justice was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The plan Sarah and Torres devised was elegantly simple and terrifyingly dangerous. Use Atlas's scheduled transfer to Jake and Maria's home as bait to draw Bobby Carson into the open. What they hadn't anticipated was how quickly Carson would take that bait, or how far his desperation had pushed him toward complete psychological breakdown. The morning of the transfer dawned gray and humid, typical Florida weather that matched the tension crackling through Sunrise Animal Hospital. Sarah had spent the night in her office, ostensibly reviewing Atlas's discharge papers but actually memorizing every detail of the tactical plan Torres had laid out. Hidden in her white coat were a wire transmitter and a panic button that would bring a SWAT team running, assuming she lived long enough to press it. Atlas seemed to sense the gravity of the day. He'd been unusually alert since sunrise, his amber eyes tracking every movement in the recovery ward with the hypervigilance of a soldier preparing for battle. When Sarah approached his kennel for the final pre-discharge examination, he immediately pressed against the bars and whined softly. Not from pain, but from what she'd learned to recognize as his attempt to communicate urgent information. "I know, boy," she whispered, running her fingers through his fur. "Today's the day we find out what you remember." Jake and Maria Rodriguez arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, their nervous excitement palpable as they prepared to welcome Atlas into their home. They'd spent weeks converting Tommy's old bedroom into a recovery space for their new family member, complete with orthopedic bedding and toys that had been donated by well-wishers from across the country. "Dr. Mitchell," Jake said, his weathered firefighter's hands gentle as he knelt beside Atlas's kennel. "Maria and I want you to know, we understand this isn't just about giving a dog a home, this is about giving a hero the peace he's earned." What Jake and Maria didn't know was that their home had been under surveillance for 3 days. Torres's team had identified Bobby Carson's pickup truck parked at various locations along their street, always with a clear view of the house but never close enough to constitute obvious stalking. Carson was watching, waiting, and planning something that would likely end in violence. The discharge process proceeded with calculated normalcy. Sarah filled out paperwork while Maria cooed over Atlas, and Jake discussed security arrangements with Torres, conversations that were actually coded updates about the tactical team's positioning. Atlas remained calm throughout the process, but Sarah noticed his ears swiveling constantly, tracking sounds that human ears couldn't detect. At 10:47 a.m., as Jake was loading Atlas's medications into a travel carrier, the German Shepherd suddenly went rigid. His hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he stared at the hospital's front entrance with laser focus. Sarah followed his gaze and felt her blood turn to ice water. Bobby Ray Carson stood in the parking lot, no longer making any attempt at concealment. He wore his old police uniform, wrinkled and stained but still bearing the insignia of his former rank. In his right hand, he carried what appeared to be a veterinary medical bag. In his left, barely concealed beneath a newspaper, was the distinctive outline of a service weapon. "Torres," Sarah whispered into her wire microphone. "He's here, front parking lot. He's armed and wearing his uniform." Torres's voice crackled back through her earpiece. "We see him. Stay calm. Let him make the first move. We need him to explicitly threaten Atlas before we can arrest him." Carson began walking toward the hospital entrance with the measured pace of a man who'd already resigned himself to whatever came next. Sarah could see his lips moving. He was talking to himself, or perhaps practicing the words he planned to speak when he reached his destination. The morning sunlight caught the silver of his badge, a symbol of honor that had been corrupted beyond redemption. "Dr. Mitchell," Jake said urgently, his firefighter's instincts recognizing danger even without understanding its source. "Something's wrong with that guy." Atlas had begun exhibiting behavior Sarah had never seen before. He was trying to position himself between the approaching threat and the humans in the room, despite being confined to his kennel. The dog who'd been tortured and broken was preparing to protect the people who'd shown him kindness, even at the cost of his own life. Carson entered the hospital lobby with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere. Conversations stopped. Children moved closer to their parents, and staff members began finding urgent tasks that required them to be elsewhere. The uniform still commanded respect, even worn by a man whose soul had been consumed by guilt and paranoia. "I'm here for my dog," Carson announced to the receptionist, his voice carrying the authority of his former position. "K9 Max, badge number 777. I'm his handler, and I'm here to take him home." Sarah's hands trembled as she realized the full audacity of Carson's plan. He was going to attempt to reclaim Atlas using his police credentials, betting that no one would challenge a uniformed officer's right to his partner. It was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Once Carson had Atlas alone, the dog would disappear forever, along with any hope of justice for her father's murder. "Sir," the receptionist stammered, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, "I'll need to verify your identity and—" "I don't think you understand," Carson interrupted, his hand moving toward the concealed weapon. "That dog belongs to the Miami-Dade Police Department. He's evidence in an ongoing investigation. I have legal authority to remove him from these premises immediately." Atlas's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. The mention of his former handler's voice triggered what Dr. Hernandez had identified as a severe PTSD response. The German Shepherd began trembling violently. His breathing became rapid and shallow, and he pressed himself against the back of his kennel as if trying to disappear into the walls. But something else was happening, too. Atlas was making a sound Sarah had never heard before, a low, keening whine that seemed to carry every moment of pain, betrayal, and terror he'd experienced during his captivity. It was the sound of a soul crying out for justice, and it cut through everyone present like a blade. "Officer Carson," Sarah said, stepping forward with a courage she didn't feel. Max, is currently under medical care. I can't release him without proper documentation and a 48-hour observation period." Carson's face twisted with rage and desperation. "Don't you dare tell me about proper documentation, lady. I've been looking for this dog for months. He's been declared dead and someone's been keeping him alive illegally. That's theft of government property, and I'm here to reclaim what belongs to the department." The confession was exactly what Torres needed. Through Sarah's wire, she could hear the detective coordinating with her team. "All units, we have probable cause. Subject has admitted to falsifying death records. Move in on my signal." But Carson wasn't finished. His next words revealed the true depth of his madness and confirmed everything Sarah and Torres had suspected about the warehouse incident. "This dog knows things he shouldn't know," Carson continued, his voice rising with each word. "He was present during classified operations. He's seen evidence that could compromise ongoing investigations and endanger the lives of good police officers. I'm here to ensure that sensitive information doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Atlas had stopped whining and was now staring directly at Carson with an expression that chilled Sarah's soul. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. The dog remembered everything that had happened in that warehouse, everything that had been done to cover up the truth, and everything that had been done to him in the months since. "You son of a bitch," Jake Rodriguez said quietly, his firefighter's courage finally overriding his confusion. "You're the one who hurt him." Carson's mask of official authority finally slipped, revealing the broken, desperate man beneath. "You don't understand what's at stake here. That explosion, it wasn't supposed to happen. We were just supposed to remove some evidence, clean up a few files. But the damn dog kept digging, kept finding things we'd missed. And when the building came down—" He stopped himself, realizing he'd said too much, but it was too late. Everyone in the room now understood that they were witnessing a confession to multiple murders, conspiracy, and the systematic torture of a police animal who'd been guilty of nothing more than doing his job too well. "Torres, now!" Sarah shouted into her microphone as Carson reached for his weapon. The front doors of the hospital exploded inward as the tactical team moved in, but Carson was already drawing his gun, his eyes locked on Atlas's kennel with the focused intensity of a man who knew his freedom depended on eliminating the only witness to his crimes. What happened next would be replayed on news broadcasts across the country and analyzed by law enforcement trainers for years to come. Atlas, despite his injuries, despite his trauma, despite every reason to cower in fear, did something that defied all expectations. He forgave his tormentor. The gunshot shattered the morning stillness like thunder, but it wasn't Bobby Carson who pulled the trigger. In the chaos of the SWAT team's entry, Carson's weapon had discharged into the ceiling as he stumbled backward, his face a mask of terror and disbelief at what he'd almost done. But the damage was already complete. Not from the bullet, but from what everyone in that room had witnessed in the seconds before the tactical team intervened. Atlas lay motionless in his kennel, his massive body curled into a position Sarah recognized with horrifying clarity. The German Shepherd had positioned himself to shield the humans in the room from Carson's weapon, even though the kennel bars made such protection impossible. In his final act of service, Atlas had tried to be the hero he'd always been, regardless of the cost to himself. "No, no, no," Sarah whispered, rushing to the kennel as the SWAT officers secured Carson. Her hands trembled as she checked for vital signs, finding a pulse that was weak but steady. Atlas hadn't been shot. He'd collapsed from the combination of severe psychological stress and the physical strain of his still healing injuries. "Dr. Mitchell, step back!" Torres shouted, but Sarah was already inside the kennel, her veterinary training taking over as she began emergency assessment procedures. Atlas's breathing was shallow and rapid, his amber eyes unfocused as his body went into shock from the overwhelming trauma of facing his abuser. The scene that unfolded over the next hour would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. As Sarah worked frantically to stabilize Atlas, Bobby Carson sat in handcuffs, muttering a stream of confessions that filled in the darkest chapters of Miami-Dade's corruption scandal. The warehouse hadn't just been an evidence destruction operation, it had been the culmination of a 5-year conspiracy that had stolen millions in drug money while sending innocent people to prison for crimes committed by the very officers sworn to protect them. "He was supposed to die with Rex," Carson babbled, as Torres documented his statements. "They were both supposed to die in that explosion, and then no one would ever know what we found in that basement. But Max, Atlas, whatever his name is now, he kept digging. Even after the blast knocked him unconscious, he kept trying to get to that evidence locker." Sarah's hands stilled on Atlas's chest as the full horror of Carson's confession sank in. Rex hadn't died heroically in an explosion. He'd been murdered by his own handler when he'd discovered evidence that could expose the conspiracy. Atlas had survived the same fate only because the building's collapse had knocked Carson unconscious before he could kill both dogs. "You murdered your own partner," Torres said, her voice barely controlled. "You killed Rex to keep him quiet." "I didn't have a choice," Carson screamed, his facade of sanity finally cracking completely. "You don't understand what they would have done to me, to my family. These weren't just local dealers. This went all the way to Tallahassee, maybe Washington. Rex found files that could have brought down senators, judges, people who make corrupt cops disappear without a trace." Atlas stirred in Sarah's arms, his breathing beginning to stabilize as the immediate crisis passed. But when his eyes opened and focused on Carson's face, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the fear and hatred everyone expected, Atlas's expression showed something that defied comprehension: pity. "He's looking at you, Carson," Jake Rodriguez said quietly from his position near the kennel. "After everything you did to him, he's still looking at you like you're someone worth saving." Carson's breakdown accelerated as Atlas continued to regard him with those impossibly compassionate amber eyes. The weight of 18 months of guilt and paranoia came crashing down on the broken man in handcuffs, and he began to sob with the desperate intensity of someone whose soul was finally ready to confess its darkest sins. "I kept him alive because I couldn't bring myself to kill him," Carson whispered. "Every time I looked at those eyes, I saw Rex looking back at me. I saw every innocent person we'd framed, every family we'd destroyed for money. I thought if I could break his spirit, make him forget what he'd seen, maybe I could live with what I'd done." The cruelty of Carson's logic was breathtaking in its twisted humanity. He'd tortured Atlas not out of sadism, but out of a desperate attempt to silence his own conscience. Every injury inflicted on the German Shepherd had been Carson's way of trying to bury the memory of his partner's murder and the innocent lives destroyed by his greed. Dr. Patricia Hernandez arrived as Carson was being loaded into a police transport. Her expertise needed to evaluate Atlas's psychological state after the traumatic confrontation. What she found defied every textbook she'd ever read about canine behavior and PTSD recovery. "He's not exhibiting signs of renewed trauma," she told Sarah in amazement, as they observed Atlas through the kennel bars. "If anything, he seems relieved, as if confronting his abuser has actually accelerated his healing process." Atlas was indeed showing signs of remarkable improvement. His breathing had returned to normal. His posture was more relaxed than it had been since his rescue. And most significantly, he was making direct eye contact with the male SWAT officers who remained in the room. The selective fear of men in uniform that had characterized his recovery appeared to be diminishing in real time. "It's like he needed to see Carson arrested to truly believe he was safe," Sarah mused, stroking Atlas's head as he rested in her lap. "He needed to know that justice was finally coming." But the day's revelations were far from over. As Torres began coordinating with federal investigators who'd been called in to handle the expanding corruption case, Atlas exhibited behavior that stunned everyone present. When crime scene photographers began documenting the hospital lobby, Atlas became agitated and began pawing at his kennel door, whining insistently until Sarah let him out. Free from confinement, Atlas immediately walked to a specific spot near the reception desk and began the digging behavior Dr. Hernandez had identified as a trauma response. But this wasn't mindless repetition. Atlas was trying to communicate something specific about that location. "Torres, you need to see this," Sarah called as Atlas continued his focused digging motion. "He's not having a PTSD episode. He's trying to tell us something." The German Shepherd's behavior became more insistent as the investigators gathered around him. Atlas would dig at the floor, then look up at the humans, then return to his digging with increased urgency. When Torres knelt beside him and said, "Show us, boy, show us what you found," Atlas immediately abandoned his digging and began what could only be described as a measured pace around the lobby, his nose to the floor as if following a scent trail. "He's replicating search behavior," Dr. Hernandez observed. "Whatever happened in that warehouse, he's trying to recreate the sequence of events that led to his discovery of evidence." The implications were staggering. Atlas wasn't just a witness to the warehouse incident. He'd been trained to remember specific locations and could potentially lead investigators to evidence that had been hidden before the explosion. His months of torture at Carson's hands hadn't destroyed his memory. They'd only delayed his ability to share what he knew. "We need to take him to the warehouse site," Torres said, her voice tight with excitement. "If Atlas can show us where the evidence was moved before the explosion, we might be able to recover materials that could bring down this entire conspiracy." Sarah felt a chill of fear at the prospect of exposing Atlas to more trauma. But the German Shepherd's behavior suggested he was ready, even eager, to complete the mission that had been interrupted by betrayal and violence. This was his chance to honor Rex's memory and ensure that their sacrifice hadn't been in vain. As preparations began for the most unusual crime scene investigation in Miami-Dade's history, Atlas sat beside Sarah with the composed dignity of a professional returning to duty. The broken, tortured animal who'd been found like discarded trash had transformed into something magnificent, a warrior ready to testify against the corruption that had nearly destroyed him. The dog who'd survived hell was about to lead everyone back to the scene of the crime, carrying with him the hope of justice and the promise that even the darkest conspiracies couldn't silence the truth forever. In his amber eyes burned the light of righteous purpose, and for the first time since his rescue, Atlas looked like the hero he'd always been. The warehouse district at midnight felt like a graveyard of broken dreams, its skeletal remains of industrial buildings casting twisted shadows under the harsh glare of portable floodlights. Sarah stood beside the FBI command vehicle, watching Atlas pace nervously in the back of Torres's unmarked car, and wondered if they were making a terrible mistake by bringing him back to the scene of his trauma. 3 months of federal investigation had expanded Carson's confession into a corruption case that reached the highest levels of Florida's criminal justice system. 12 police officers, 4 judges, 2 district attorneys, and a sitting state senator had been indicted in what prosecutors were calling the largest law enforcement corruption scandal in state history. But the key evidence that could ensure convictions remained buried somewhere in the rubble of the warehouse that had supposedly destroyed it. Dr. Mitchell, FBI agent Rebecca Stone approached with the kind of crisp professionalism that barely masked deep skepticism. I want to be clear about what we're asking of your dog. We're not just looking for evidence. We're trying to reconstruct a crime scene that was deliberately destroyed to cover up multiple felonies. If Atlas can't handle the psychological pressure, we need to abort immediately. Sarah looked at Atlas, who had stopped pacing and was now staring intently at the warehouse ruins. His body language showed none of the fear responses that had characterized his early recovery. Instead, he exhibited the focused alertness of a working dog preparing to do his job. "He's ready," Sarah said, with more confidence than she felt. "Atlas has been preparing for this moment since the day we rescued him." The warehouse explosion had left behind a crater nearly 50 feet across, surrounded by twisted metal and chunks of concrete that bore the distinctive scoring patterns of military-grade explosives. The official report blamed an accidental detonation of stored chemicals, but the FBI's reconstruction suggested a carefully orchestrated demolition designed to destroy specific areas while leaving others intact. As the investigative team prepared their equipment, Atlas became increasingly agitated, not with fear, but with what Sarah recognized as professional impatience. He knew why they were there, and he wanted to begin the work that had been interrupted by betrayal and violence 18 months earlier. "Let him out," Torres said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd watched Atlas transform from victim to witness over the past months. "He knows what we need." The moment Atlas's paws touched the ground near the warehouse ruins, his entire demeanor changed. The traumatized animal who'd flinched at loud sounds and cowered from male voices disappeared, replaced by K9 Max, the elite SWAT dog who'd never failed a mission. His nose went to the ground, his ears pricked forward, and he began methodically working a search pattern that spoke of years of professional training. "Jesus," whispered Agent Stone as she watched Atlas navigate the debris field with the precision of a crime scene technician. "He's not just searching randomly. He's following a specific route." Atlas's first stop was a section of collapsed concrete that had once been the warehouse's northwest corner. He pawed at the rubble briefly, then sat in the alert position that indicated a positive identification. When investigators cleared away the debris, they found the twisted remains of a file cabinet that had been welded shut and embedded in the building's foundation. "This is it," Torres breathed as bolt cutters revealed the cabinet's contents. "These are the files your father was looking for, Sarah. The ones that got him killed." The documents inside told a story of systematic corruption that made Carson's confession look like a misdemeanor. For 5 years, a conspiracy of law enforcement officials had been stealing evidence from major drug busts, selling the drugs back to dealers, and using the profits to bribe judges and prosecutors who would ensure that the original dealers received light sentences in exchange for kickbacks. But Atlas wasn't finished. His second alert came at what had been the warehouse's eastern wall, where investigators found a hidden compartment containing over $2 million in cash and detailed records of every bribe paid, every case fixed, and every innocent person framed to maintain the conspiracy's cover. The third alert nearly broke Sarah's heart. Atlas led the team to a small section of debris that yielded nothing but a twisted dog collar with a badge number that read Rex Canine Unit. The German Shepherd sat beside his former partner's collar and whined softly, a sound that carried 18 months of grief and survivor's guilt. "He's been carrying this burden alone," Dr. Hernandez observed as she documented Atlas's behavior. Rex was killed because he found evidence of the conspiracy, and Atlas has been traumatized not just by his own torture, but by his inability to save his partner. The fourth and most significant alert came when Atlas led the team away from the warehouse ruins entirely, following a scent trail that stretched nearly half a mile to an abandoned shipping container in the industrial complex's outer perimeter. Inside, investigators found what could only be described as a mobile evidence destruction facility: industrial shredders, acid baths, and furnaces designed to eliminate any trace of material that could threaten the conspiracy. "This is where they brought everything before staging the warehouse explosion," Agent Stone realized as she examined the container's contents. "They used Atlas and Rex to locate evidence, then moved it here for destruction while making it look like everything was lost in an accidental blast." But Atlas had one more revelation that would cement his status as the most valuable witness in law enforcement history. As investigators documented the shipping container's contents, the German Shepherd began exhibiting behavior that initially looked like another PTSD episode, pacing anxiously and whining while staring at a specific wall of the container. Sarah approached him carefully, recognizing the signs of Atlas trying to communicate urgent information. "What is it, boy? What do you see?" Atlas's response was to begin the digging motion that had characterized his recovery, but with renewed intensity. When investigators removed a false panel in the container's wall, they found something that made even seasoned FBI agents gasp in amazement: a complete backup of every file, every record, and every piece of evidence the conspiracy had tried to destroy. "Rex hid this," Torres whispered as she examined the carefully organized evidence cache. "Before they killed him, he managed to hide a copy of everything they were trying to destroy. And Atlas has been trying to tell us about it for 18 months. The discovery transformed the federal investigation from a corruption case into a national scandal. The backup files contained evidence of conspiracy that reached into Washington, D.C., implicating federal judges, DEA officials, and members of Congress who'd been receiving payments in exchange for blocking drug enforcement legislation. As dawn broke over the warehouse district, Atlas sat beside the shipping container with the satisfied expression of a dog who'd finally completed his mission. The evidence he and Rex had died to protect was now in the hands of federal prosecutors who would ensure that justice was finally served. Sarah knelt beside him, running her fingers through his fur as she processed the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. "Your father would be proud," Torres said softly, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Officer Daniel Mitchell died trying to expose this conspiracy. Atlas just finished the job." But the night's revelations had taken their toll on Atlas's still fragile psyche. The German Shepherd who'd performed with professional precision throughout the investigation was now showing signs of exhaustion and emotional overload. His work was finished, but the transition back to civilian life would require the same careful healing process that had brought him this far. "Take him home," Agent Stone said, her earlier skepticism replaced by profound respect. "Atlas has given us enough evidence to bring down the entire conspiracy. The rest is up to the justice system." As Sarah helped Atlas into Torres's car for the ride back to Sunrise Animal Hospital, she realized that this was more than the end of an investigation. It was the beginning of Atlas's real recovery. For 18 months, he'd carried the burden of being the sole witness to multiple murders and systematic corruption. Now, with the truth finally exposed, he could begin the process of learning to be not just a survivor, but a dog who deserved peace, love, and the simple joy of a family that would never betray him. The warrior had completed his final mission. Now it was time for Atlas to discover what it meant to simply be loved. 6 months after the warehouse investigation, Atlas Rodriguez, he'd officially taken Jake and Maria's family name, lay in a patch of morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window of his forever home, watching Maria prepare breakfast with the contentment of a dog who'd finally learned what safety felt like. The transformation from traumatized survivor to beloved family member hadn't happened overnight, but it had happened with the steady certainty of seasons changing. The Rodriguez house in Orlando had become a pilgrimage site of sorts for people touched by Atlas's story. Letters arrived daily from across the country, children's drawings of heroic German shepherds, thank-you notes from law enforcement families, and donations to the Canine Heroes Foundation that had been established in Rex's memory. Jake had converted Tommy's old bedroom into Atlas's recovery space, but the dog rarely used it, preferring to sleep beside their bed where he could maintain protective watch over his new family. Dr. Sarah Mitchell visited every Tuesday, officially for veterinary checkups, but actually to witness the miracle of Atlas's psychological healing. The dog, who'd once flinched at male voices, now greeted Jake's firefighter buddies with tail-wagging enthusiasm. The animal, who'd been conditioned to associate uniform sounds with torture, now served as a therapy dog at the local VA hospital, helping veterans process their own traumas with the wisdom of someone who understood suffering and had chosen healing. "You know what amazes me most?" Sarah said to Maria as they watched Atlas gently interact with a group of PTSD veterans during one of his therapy sessions. "He's not just surviving anymore, he's thriving. More than that, he's helping others thrive." The legal aftermath of Atlas's testimony had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Bobby Carson's cooperation as a star witness had led to the conviction of 47 individuals in what prosecutors called the most comprehensive corruption case in American law enforcement history. 3 federal judges had been impeached. 2 senators had resigned in disgrace, and the DEA had undergone complete restructuring of its southern division. Carson himself had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, but his genuine remorse and cooperation had earned him placement in a minimum security facility where he'd become an advocate for criminal justice reform. In a letter delivered through his attorney, he'd written to Atlas, "I can't undo what I did to you and Rex, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure it never happens to another canine partner. Your forgiveness taught me that redemption is possible, even for someone like me." The letter had arrived on the 1-year anniversary of Atlas's rescue, a day that Jake and Maria had declared an annual celebration of Second Chances Day. The neighborhood had joined in, with families bringing their own rescue animals to share stories of healing and hope. Atlas had spent the afternoon playing with children and accepting belly rubs from admirers, his transformation from broken victim to community hero complete. But it was the quiet moments that truly demonstrated Atlas's remarkable recovery. Sarah had arrived early for one Tuesday visit to find Atlas sitting patiently beside Jake's wheelchair as her adoptive father recovered from back surgery. The German shepherd who'd been tortured for his loyalty was now providing comfort to the man who'd offered him unconditional love. "He knows I'm hurting," Jake explained, his weathered firefighter's hands gentle as he stroked Atlas's head. "Yesterday, when the pain was really bad, he brought me his favorite tennis ball and just sat with me until the medication kicked in. Didn't try to play, didn't ask for attention, just offered his presence as comfort." The tennis ball in question, Tommy's old squeaky duck had been replaced by something more dignified, had become Atlas's signature therapy tool. During VA hospital visits, He would carefully select which veteran needed his attention and deliver the ball as an invitation to play or simply as a gesture of companionship. His instincts for reading human emotional needs had been refined by his own trauma into something approaching supernatural empathy. Maria's transformation had been equally remarkable to witness. The elementary school teacher who'd been drowning in grief over her son's death had discovered new purpose in caring for Atlas and sharing his story with her students. Her classroom had become headquarters for the Canine Heroes Foundation, with children raising money through bake sales and talent shows to support the medical care of retired police dogs. "Tommy would have loved Atlas," Maria said during one of Sarah's visits, her voice carrying joy instead of the pain that had characterized their early conversations. "He always said that the best soldiers were the ones who never forgot they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. Atlas fights every day against his own trauma for other veterans who are struggling, for justice that honors his partner's memory." The broader impact of Atlas's story had reached far beyond criminal justice reform. Atlas's law, signed by the governor on the second anniversary of his rescue, had established the nation's strictest penalties for crimes against service animals and mandated psychological evaluation for all K9 handlers. The legislation had been supported by law enforcement organizations across the country, many of whom cited Atlas's courage as inspiration for protecting their own four-legged officers. Detective Lisa Torres, who'd been promoted to head the newly created Police Integrity Division, visited regularly to update Atlas on the ongoing prosecutions his testimony had made possible. During these visits, Torres often reflected on how the investigation had changed her own perspective on justice and redemption. "You know what Atlas taught me?" Torres said during one such visit, scratching behind the German Shepherd's ears as he rested his head on her lap. "Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about healing. Every conviction we've secured because of his testimony has helped heal the families who were destroyed by this corruption. Every corrupt officer we've removed has made communities safer." Atlas didn't just survive his trauma. He transformed it into something that protects others. The first Christmas in the Rodriguez household had been a celebration that would have seemed impossible during Atlas's darkest days in recovery. The German Shepherd, who'd once been too traumatized to accept treats from strangers, had spent the morning helping Maria distribute gifts to children at the local shelter, his gentle demeanor bringing smiles to faces that had forgotten how to trust. Jake had surprised everyone by hanging Tommy's Purple Heart medal on Atlas's collar for the day, not as a costume, but as recognition of service that deserved honor equal to any human veteran's sacrifice. "Some heroes wear uniforms," Jake had said as he adjusted the medal. "Others wear fur and carry scars that remind us that courage comes in all forms." As Sarah prepared to leave after another Tuesday visit, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. Atlas dozed in his favorite spot by the kitchen window, his scarred face peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. The wounds that had once defined him were now simply part of his story, evidence of survival rather than symbols of victimhood. "Dr. Mitchell," Maria called from the kitchen, "would you stay for dinner? We're having meatloaf, and Atlas gets his own portion now." Sarah accepted the invitation, knowing that these Tuesday dinners had become as therapeutic for her as they were celebratory for the Rodriguez family. She'd found her own healing in Atlas's recovery, discovering that the daughter of a murdered police officer could honor her father's memory not through vengeance, but through the same compassion that Atlas had shown his own tormentor. As they gathered around the dinner table, Jake, Maria, Sarah, and Atlas lying contentedly beside his food bowl, the conversation turned to plans for the upcoming Second Chances Day celebration. The event had grown from a neighborhood gathering to a national awareness campaign, with police departments across the country hosting adoption events for retired canine officers. "You know what I think Tommy would say if he could see us now?" Maria mused, watching Atlas accept gentle pats from Sarah. He'd say that the best way to honor the fallen is to make sure their sacrifice creates more love in the world, not more pain. Atlas looked up at the sound of Tommy's name, his amber eyes bright with intelligence and something that could only be described as peace. The dog, who'd been abandoned like trash and tortured by the very system he'd served, had become a living testament to the power of forgiveness, the possibility of healing, and the truth that heroes are forged not by perfection, but by the choice to keep loving despite every reason to give up. In that moment, surrounded by the family who'd helped him remember what love looked like, Atlas was no longer defined by what had been done to him. He was defined by what he'd chosen to do with his second chance at life, and by the countless other second chances his story had inspired in hearts across America. In a world that often feels divided by anger and mistrust, Atlas's story reminds us of the timeless American values that built this great nation: loyalty, courage, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves a second chance. For those of us who've lived long enough to see friends pass away, children grow up and move on, and communities change beyond recognition, Atlas represents something precious: the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. This German shepherd, betrayed by those he trusted most, chose forgiveness over hatred. He chose to protect rather than retreat. He chose to love again when every instinct told him to give up. Just like the greatest generation taught us through World War II, just like the civil rights heroes showed us in the 1960s, Atlas proved that true strength isn't found in striking back. It's found in the courage to keep believing in goodness despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. His story isn't just about a dog who survived. It's about the American spirit that refuses to let darkness win. In our golden years, when we're supposed to be bitter about what we've lost, Atlas shows us there's still time to choose hope over cynicism, love over fear. Share your thoughts. What second chance story from your own life taught you the most about forgiveness? Have you ever witnessed an act of loyalty that restored your faith in others? Let's honor Atlas by sharing our own stories of resilience in the comments below. The golden afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Rodriguez backyard as Atlas celebrated what Jake had officially declared his gotcha day. Exactly 2 years since he'd been found broken and abandoned on Highway 95. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Where once lay a German shepherd so traumatized he couldn't trust human touch, now stood a dignified therapy dog whose presence had helped dozens of veterans find their own path to healing. Sarah arrived early for the celebration, carrying a special gift that had been 2 years in the making. The bronze memorial plaque bore Rex's name and badge number, with an inscription that read, "In memory of K9 Rex, whose courage lives on in the heart of his partner Atlas." Heroes never truly die. They inspire others to carry forward their mission of service. "This belongs in your garden," Sarah told Jake and Maria as she presented the memorial. Rex's sacrifice made Atlas's survival possible. They should be remembered together. Atlas approached the plaque with what could only be described as reverence, sniffing it carefully before sitting in the dignified, alert position that marked his K9 training. For a moment it seemed as if he understood the significance of the tribute to his fallen partner, and his amber eyes held a depth of emotion that reminded everyone present why his story had touched millions of hearts. The celebration had drawn visitors from across the country. FBI agent Rebecca Stone had flown in from Washington to personally thank Atlas for his role in what she called the most significant corruption investigation in Bureau history. Detective Torres brought updates on the final prosecutions. All 47 defendants had been convicted, with sentences ranging from 10 years to life without parole for the most serious offenders. But it was the arrival of unexpected guests that truly made the day special. A convoy of vehicles pulled into the Rodriguez driveway, disgorging a delegation of current and former K-9 officers who'd traveled from departments across the Southeast to honor Atlas's courage. Each handler brought their own partner, creating a gathering that Jake described as the most well-behaved party in Orlando history. Atlas didn't just survive his ordeal, announced Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, representing the Military Working Dog Foundation. He transformed his trauma into a mission that has revolutionized how we protect and care for service animals. The changes in training protocols, medical care, and psychological support for working dogs can all be traced back to lessons learned from his recovery. The afternoon's highlight came when Atlas was presented with an honorary badge, not a replacement for his original K-9 credentials, but recognition of his new role as America's first official therapy dog emeritus. The ceremony was conducted with the full dignity of a military honor guard, complete with a flag presentation and the playing of taps in memory of all fallen K-9 officers. Atlas accepted the honor with the same composed dignity that had characterized his recovery, sitting perfectly still as the badge was pinned to a special collar that Jake had commissioned from a local artisan. When the ceremony concluded and Atlas was released from his formal position, his first act was to approach each visiting K-9 and touch noses in what handlers recognized as the universal K-9 greeting between fellow professionals. Maria had prepared a feast that accommodated both human and K-9 guests with a special dog cake made from Atlas's favorite ingredients, sweet potato, peanut butter, and the bacon treats that had marked his first breakthrough in trusting humans again. As the celebration moved into evening, the conversation turned to the broader impact of Atlas's story on American culture. You know what strikes me most about letters we receive? Maria shared as she watched Atlas patiently accept attention from a group of children whose parents were veteran K-9 handlers. It's not just the stories about animal rescue or police reform. People write to tell us that Atlas's forgiveness helped them find their own way to heal from betrayal, trauma, divorce, loss of faith. His story has become bigger than law enforcement. It's become about the human capacity for redemption. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, who documented Atlas's psychological recovery for veterinary journals worldwide, offered her professional assessment of his transformation. In clinical terms, Atlas has achieved what we call post-traumatic growth, not just recovery from trauma, but actual psychological enhancement beyond his pre-trauma baseline. He's more empathetic, more intuitive, more capable of forming deep bonds than he was before his ordeal. His suffering was transformed into wisdom. As evening deepened, the formal celebration gave way to something more intimate. The visiting K-9 officers shared stories of their own partners, creating an impromptu support group that demonstrated the powerful bonds formed between handlers and their four-legged partners. Atlas moved among the gathering like a therapy dog making rounds, offering comfort to anyone who seemed to need his presence. The most moving moment came when Bobby Carson's attorney arrived with a letter and a small package. Carson, now in his third year of federal prison, had been following Atlas's recovery through news reports and had requested permission to send a gift for the anniversary celebration. "I understand if you don't want to read this," the attorney said, offering the sealed envelope to Jake and Maria. Mr. Carson wanted Atlas to know that watching his recovery has been part of Carson's own healing process. Jake read the letter silently first, his expression softening as he processed Carson's words. Then, with Atlas sitting attentively beside him, he read aloud. "Dear Atlas, I know I have no right to be part of your celebration, but I wanted you to know that your story has changed me in ways I never thought possible. In prison, I work with a therapy dog program, helping other inmates learn to care for animals that will eventually become service dogs for disabled veterans. Every day, I try to honor Rex's memory by treating these dogs with the respect and gentleness I should have shown you both from the beginning. I've included a small donation to the Canine Heroes Foundation, money from my prison job that I hope can help other dogs avoid what I put you through. Thank you for teaching me that forgiveness is possible, even for someone like me." The package contained a hand-carved wooden duck, crafted in the prison woodshop with the skill of someone who'd spent countless hours perfecting his technique. It was clearly meant to replace the squeaky toy that had marked Atlas's early recovery, but this version would last forever, a permanent symbol of redemption and the power of second chances. Atlas sniffed the carving carefully, then gently took it in his mouth and carried it to his favorite spot in the garden. The symbolic acceptance of Carson's gift brought tears to many eyes and served as a powerful reminder that Atlas's greatest lesson wasn't about survival. It was about the transformative power of forgiveness. As the celebration wound down and guests began their journeys home, Sarah found herself alone with Atlas in the quiet garden. The German shepherd, who'd been dumped like trash, face slashed and mouth filled with sand, now rested peacefully beside Rex's memorial, the wooden duck positioned carefully between his paws. "You did it, boy," Sarah whispered, stroking his head as she had during so many difficult nights in the hospital. "You survived, you testified, you healed, and you taught all of us what courage really looks like. Your father would be so proud." Atlas looked up at her with those remarkable amber eyes, eyes that had seen humanity's worst cruelty and chosen to believe in its capacity for good. In them, Sarah saw not just her own reflection, but the reflection of everyone who'd been touched by his story and inspired to choose hope over cynicism, love over fear. The stars appeared one by one in the darkening Florida sky, and Sarah realized that Atlas's story wasn't ending. It was beginning a new chapter. Every veteran he comforted, every child he inspired, every police department that improved its canine care because of laws bearing his name, every person who chose forgiveness over revenge because they'd heard his story, all of these became part of Atlas's continuing mission. He'd been abandoned like trash and had become a national treasure. He'd been betrayed by those sworn to protect him and had chosen to protect others in return. He'd been broken by hatred and had responded with love powerful enough to transform not just his own life, but the lives of countless others who needed to believe that redemption was possible. As Sarah prepared to leave, Atlas rose and walked her to her car, a nightly ritual that had developed during his recovery. At the gate, he sat in his perfect alert position and watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner, the faithful guardian ensuring safe passage for someone he loved. Tomorrow would bring new therapy visits, new veterans to comfort, new children to inspire. Atlas would continue his mission of healing, carrying forward the memory of his fallen partner and the lessons learned from his own journey through darkness back into light. In a world that often seemed broken beyond repair, Atlas had proven that love was stronger than hatred, forgiveness more powerful than revenge, and hope more enduring than despair. His story had become America's story, a testament to the belief that no matter how far we fall, no matter how badly we're betrayed, no matter how broken we become, there's always a chance for redemption, if we're brave enough to trust in love one more time. The German shepherd, who'd been dumped like trash, had taught a nation that true heroism isn't found in perfection. It's found in the courage to keep loving despite every reason to give up. And in choosing love, Atlas had discovered something more precious than justice. He'd found peace,